A copper sleeve, a woman's arm, rising slow. The candles smelled of cedar that night. The chandeliers held low gold light. 200 wolves sat in a hall built to intimidate, drinking dark wine, laughing without quite trusting one another. None of them watching the corner where the trays moved. Nobody ever watched the corner where the trays moved. That was the whole point of a tray: a white apron, a plain gray dress, a water carafe in a small, steady hand. 2 years of practiced invisibility, folded under the ribs like a coat she had learned not to take off. She did not remember choosing. She only remembered moving. And somewhere in the half-second, between a raised hand and the silence that followed, a mark on a wrist. 3 lines crossed by a fourth. A thing she was never supposed to see. The hall went quiet. 200 breaths held. And across the long room, pale blue eyes did not look away. The hand was already in the air. Wren saw it before her mind named it. A copper sleeve. A woman's arm. Rising slow. The kind of slow that pretends to be an accident. The kind of slow that means a body has already decided. And the woman that hand was aimed at had silver in her dark hair. A burgundy dress. A posture so correct it was so almost architectural. She was the mother of the Alpha King. Wren had a water carafe in her left hand, a white apron, a plain gray dress. 2 years of practiced invisibility tucked under her ribs like a folded coat. She did not remember choosing, she only remembered moving. The impact landed across her forearm, flat, sharp, hard enough to ring up through her shoulder. The wine in the carafe sloshed in a dark red arc across her apron. Slow, like blood deciding where to fall, and the hall went silent. 200 wolves. Candles smelling of cedar and amber. Chandeliers full of low gold light. Black floral arrangements rising from every surface, and every single throat in that room stopped. Because an Omega server had just stepped between a raised hand and the Alpha King's mother. And nobody had a protocol for it. Wren stood very still. The drip of wine off her apron, the only sound she could hear. Her own pulse, thick behind her ears. The forearm starting already to ache. Then the woman in the copper dress lowered her arm, and as the sleeve fell back, just a half second, just 1 inch of pale skin showing on the inside of her wrist, Wren saw it, a mark, inked dark, 3 lines crossed by a fourth, small, half hidden. The kind of mark you would only catch if you happened to be standing exactly where she was standing. At exactly the wrong angle, at exactly the wrong moment. She did not know what it meant. She only knew, somewhere deep, somewhere animal, that she was never supposed to see it. The sleeve dropped. The mark vanished, and the moment moved on without her, except for one thing, across the long hall. At the head of the raised platform, the Alpha King had not moved. He had not needed to. The room had rearranged itself around the moment, and he stood at the center of it, pale blue eyes fixed on the place where she had stepped in, watching her with an expression she could not read, which frightened her more than anything else in that hall, precisely because she could not read it. They said an Omega should know her place. Wren had heard it. So many times the sentence had stopped sounding. Like a warning, it had become a wall, something solid, something you pressed your back against. Until you forgot you had a spine of your own. Her mother had said it with love. The way people who have been hurt try to fold that hurt into a shield for someone they love. Her pack elders had said it with the flat certainty of men who believe the order of the world is also the kindness of it. Her supervisor had said it like a schedule, like a delivery time, instruction, not cruelty, and for a long time. Wren had believed all of them. She was 23. She carried plates for a living. And up until the night her forearm refused to stay still, that was the whole of what she allowed herself to be. 2 years on the banquet circuit. Every formal gathering the Northern packs through, every summit, every season feast held somewhere grand enough to remind the people attending of their own importance. Her supervisor was a broad-shouldered beta woman named Mara. Mara had hired her, 'cause she was, in her words, quiet, quick, and forgettable. Mara meant it as a compliment. Wren took it as a job description. and tried not to think too hard about the fact that being forgettable had once been the thing she feared most in the world. Somewhere along the way, it had become the thing she leaned on. The Crescent Hall sat at the edge of Thornwall City, perched above the river like a story that belonged to somebody else. That night was the Convergence Feast, the one gathering each year where all 4 Alpha territories sent representatives to reaffirm their alliances. The hall had been dressed to intimidate. Heavy floral arrangements, low amber light, the air thick with mulled wine and something sharper underneath: power, tension, the specific electricity that fills a room when too many dominant wolves gather in one place. None of them fully trusting each other. All of them pretending they do. Ren had been assigned the eastern corridor. The tables closest to the platform. The ones nearest where the Alpha King's party would sit. She had not asked for it. Mara gave it to her. Because she didn't spill. Because she didn't stare. Because she moved between shoulders and chairbacks with the practiced silence of a woman who has learned the geography of a room, which gaps to slip through, which conversations to skirt, which tables to approach from the left. Because the man seated there talks with his whole arms, and has already knocked over one goblet and blamed the nearest staff for it. These were the small, constant calculations of her working life. Invisible to the people they protected, she noticed other things too. The way certain betas leaned slightly away from their alpha counterparts, just enough to signal deference without performing a bow. The way the 4 representatives from the Western Territory had set their backs to the wall, watching the room instead of joining it. And the young server, Eli, 6 weeks on the job. He kept his eyes on the floor, a beat too long every time a dominant wolf passed near him. The specific posture of someone who has learned submission as survival, and hasn't yet figured out how to make it look natural. Ren recognized it because she had worn it herself. The air changed about 2 minutes before the doors opened. She felt it before she understood it, a shift in pressure, the way a room feels before a storm. The conversations didn't stop, the music didn't falter, but something tightened. And every wolf in that hall felt it, and the room straightened without anyone deciding to. Then he walked in. She had heard about the Alpha King of the Northern Highlands, the way you hear about weather before it arrives. Through other people's reactions. Through the way everyone around you starts moving differently. She had served enough gatherings to think she understood what alpha authority looked like in a room. The way it organized the air around itself. She was not ready for how completely it was true of him. He was taller than she'd imagined, which was saying something, because she had imagined him large to begin with. He came through the entrance with the unhurried certainty of a man who has never once wondered whether he'd be given room, and the room gave it. Freely. Instantly. Space opened around him before his name was even announced. Dark hair pulled back, a face all clean angles and cool assessment, pale blue eyes sweeping the hall, the way another man might sweep a battlefield. Black leather across shoulders broad enough to make the fur trim look practical instead of decorative. Old scars on his forearms. Visible, unremarked. Worn the way everything else about him was worn, without apology, without explanation. Kael. The name moved through the room ahead of him, and behind him. 2 steps back and to the left, walked a woman Ren understood immediately to be someone who mattered, Lady Ilsa. The Alpha King's mother, elegant in the way that only time and survived difficulty can produce. Silver threaded through dark hair, coiled precise at the back of her neck, deep burgundy dress. A stillness about her that drew the eye in a different way than her son's force did. The particular confidence of a woman who has already survived the worst things a life can hand you, and found herself standing anyway. Ren watched her the way she watched most things, carefully, from the edges, cataloging without detaching. She was refilling a water goblet at the foot of the platform steps, when the woman in the copper dress rose from her seat, and the rest. You have already seen the mark on the wrist, the wine on the apron, the 200 held breaths, and the pale blue eyes that did not look away. Mara was at her elbow within seconds, fingers closing around her arm with a grip that was professional and desperate in equal measure. "Step back," Mara breathed it against her ear. "Step back. Be quiet, and do not say one word." Ren let herself be moved. She kept her eyes down. She let the room begin to breathe again around her. Let the voices resume their careful rhythms. Let the machinery of the feast restart itself. But as Mara steered her toward the corridor door, she made the mistake of glancing back. Kael was still watching her. He had not looked away, not once, across the entire length of that hall, through the resumed motion of servers and the resumed noise of talk. His gaze had tracked the path Mara was walking her down, with an expression that was not anger, not amusement, not the cold dismissal she would have found easiest to survive, something closer to calculation, something closer to interest. The corridor door swung shut behind her, and she stood in the narrow service hallway, wine-stained apron, aching forearm, heart working far too hard for someone who was supposed to be invisible. And she thought, "You have done something you can't undo." The letter came the next morning, sealed, addressed in her name, written in a hand she did not recognize, pressed with a wax mark she had only ever seen on official Northern Highland documents. She stared at it a long time before she opened it. "Report to the King's Hall at noon. Do not be late." No signature. No explanation. No hint of what waited on the other side of those words. Only the certainty, settling cold into the pit of her stomach, that whatever was coming was already in motion. She changed her apron 3 times that morning, not because the first 2 were stained. They weren't. She had scrubbed the wine out the night before, in the small stone sink of the staff quarters. Scrubbed until the water ran clear, and her hands went raw from the cold. The aprons were fine. She kept changing them because standing at the narrow mirror and adjusting the ties gave her hands something to do. And her hands very badly needed something to do. Ely found her in the hallway at 11:30, leaning against the wall outside the linen closet, the letter still folded in her pocket, even though she had read it 11 times and long since memorized all 8 words. He was 20, slight in the way young beta males sometimes are before they fully settle into themselves, an enfant favos. Eyes that always looked a little worried even when nothing was wrong. This morning, those eyes were doing something complicated. "They're saying the Western delegation filed a grievance." He said it without preamble, because Eli had never learned the art of easing into bad news. "Against you, for interference." Ren looked at him. "A grievance, with the Convergence Council." He hesitated. "Mara's been in her office since 7. She won't open the door, she absorbed it. The Convergence Council. The body that governed conduct at sanctioned events. A council of elders and representatives whose whole purpose, as far as she had ever understood it, was to make sure no action taken at a formal gathering could be read as an aggression between territories, a waitress stepping between a raised hand and the Alpha King's mother. Apparently that was the kind of thing that needed documentation.
Filed by whom?
"Lady Mireille," he said the name carefully. "The way you say the name of a thing you're not sure is safe to say out loud. The woman in the copper dress. She's the Western Alpha's cousin." He cleared his throat. "She's saying you assaulted her." The word landed with the specific absurd that has nonetheless been made official. She had blocked a slap, and now she was a documented aggressor at an Interpack summit. "Go back to your shift," she told him. "Please." His voice cracked a little. "Ren, please." "I'll be fine," she said it quietly. The way she said most things, he looked at her a moment longer than was comfortable. And she could see him doing the arithmetic that young, kind people do when they want to help and understand. They can't. The quiet math of helplessness. Then he nodded once and walked back toward the kitchens. She straightened her apron. Out of pure habit, she checked the letter one more time, as though the words might have changed overnight into something less permanent. They hadn't, so she walked to the King's Hall. Thornwall in the gray morning was a different place than it once was under amber chandeliers. The streets between the staff quarters and the King's Hall ran cobbled and steep, lined with buildings of dark stone that had been old for a very long time and seemed at peace with it. The river was audible from almost everywhere, a constant low presence beneath the sound of market stalls, opening and cartwheels on stone. The air smelled of wood smoke and bread, and underneath that, the mineral cold of running water. She walked with her hands clasped in front of her and her eyes ahead, and tried very hard not to think about the grievance, or about Mara behind her closed door, or about the particular pale blue of a pair of eyes that had followed her across a silent hall. The King's Hall was not the Crescent Hall, where the crescent had been built for ceremony. The King's Hall was built for the business of governing, a wide, dark building of fitted stone, high, narrow windows, set at the center of the city, on a slight rise that meant you were always walking uphill to reach it. The effect, she suspected, was entirely on purpose. 2 guards in Northern Highland black flanked the entrance. They looked at her when she arrived, then at each other, then back at her, with the expression of men who had been told to expect someone and were reconciling what they'd been told with what they were seeing. "Wren," she said. "I was summoned." The older one, jaw like a shelf, checked a list, found her name, stepped aside without a word. Inside, the King's Hall smelled of old paper and leather and something faintly metallic she had come to associate with authority. The corridor she was sent down was wide, lined with maps, enormous detailed territorial maps in dark frames, each one marked with boundary lines and pack sigils in faded ink. She kept her eyes on the maps as she walked, because looking at maps felt safer than thinking about where she was going. The door at the end of the corridor stood open. She stopped in the doorway, because her feet made the decision before the rest of her caught up. The room was a study, large, book-lined, the kind of room that has been used rather than decorated. Papers covered the desk in organized layers. A globe on a stand near the window, a topographical model of the Highlands, and maps on these walls too. But these had been marked in fresh ink, recently updated, notes in handwriting too small to read. From where she stood, Kael stood with his back to her, looking out the tall window at the city below. He was in simpler clothes than the night before, dark trousers, white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow. No fur, no armor, no performance. It should have made him seem smaller. It didn't, if anything. The absence of ceremony made the authority clearer. The way taking the scaffolding off a finished building reveals the structure underneath. He didn't turn when she entered, but he spoke at once, closed the door. His voice was lower than she expected. Not softer, lower, with a resonance that settled into the room like a second kind of gravity. She closed the door. Her hands were steady. She was very proud of her hands in that moment. "You know why you're here," he said, still not turning. "Lady Muriel filed a grievance," she said, "against me. Within an hour." He turned then, and she made herself hold her ground, which took more effort than she'd have liked to admit. In the gray morning light, without the warmth of the hall, he looked sharper, the pale eyes cooler, the angles of his face more pronounced. He was looking at her with the same unreadable expression from the night before. "She's calling it assault," he said. "Unprovoked physical contact with a representative of an allied territory." The absurdity rose in her throat. She pressed it down. "I blocked a slap." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "That was meant for your mother." Something moved across his expression. Quick, controlled. "Gone before she could catch it. I know what you did," he said. "I was in the room. Then you know it wasn't unprovoked." The silence that followed had weight. He studied her a long moment. The kind of study that makes you aware of every specific thing about yourself. The plainness of the gray dress, the single braid over one shoulder, the wine stain that hadn't quite lifted from the apron hem, the way she clasped her hands in front of her, the same way she always did when she was trying to look calmer than she was. "Sit down," he said. "It wasn't a request." But it also wasn't what she'd braced for. She sat in the chair across the desk. He stayed standing, which meant she had to look up at him, which she suspected was not an accident. "The council reviewed the grievance this morning," he said. "They've determined the incident falls within a gray area of the conduct statutes. Physical intervention at a formal gathering. Regardless of intent," her stomach dropped. Gray area meaning that under normal circumstances, you would be facing formal censure and a permanent ban from sanctioned events. He paused. "These are not normal circumstances." "She waited, my mother," he said, and something in his voice shifted, very slightly, like a door opening a fraction in a wall that was otherwise solid. "Has requested the grievance be dismissed, on the grounds that what you did was protection, not aggression," she exhaled. "The council does not dismiss grievances on the request of individuals, regardless of rank, including mine." Another pause, different in quality. "Deliberate, which means the grievance stays active, and you stay in a complicated position. What does that mean for me?" He looked at her steadily. "It means I have a proposal." The proposal was not what she expected. "I want you on staff here," he said. "In the King's Hall." She stared at him, temporarily, "until the council closes the file. My mother has suggested the most effective argument against the censure is demonstrated trust. That the household of the Alpha King does not consider you a threat. That we have, in fact, chosen to extend you employment. Your mother suggested this. She's persuasive. It wasn't quite dry. It wasn't quite warm. It landed somewhere in between, and she did not know what to do with it. What would the position be? Household staff. The residential wing, assisting with correspondence, receiving callers. General support for my mother's schedule while she remains in Thornwall for the season. Appropriate quarters. Your circuit work suspended for the duration." She thought about Mara behind her closed door, about Eli's worried face, about the word assault attached to her name in a council file, sitting somewhere in this very building, patient and permanent. And if I decline? The question cost her something to ask. She felt it leave her mouth and understood at once that it declared a position, that she was someone who needed to know the shape of a choice before making it, even when the alternative was almost certainly worse. Something shifted in his expression, not displeasure, something closer to recognition. "If you decline, the grievance proceeds through standard channels. The council will likely rule in Lady Muriel's favor. Given the political pressures involved, you will be censured and barred." A pause. "I won't compel you. That is not what this is." And she believed him. She wasn't entirely sure why. She had known him less than 20 minutes across 2 encounters, but the statement had the texture of something he meant, rather than something he was saying for effect. And she had spent enough time reading rooms and people to know the difference. "I'll need to collect my things," she said. He nodded once, already turning back toward the desk. "Someone will take you." "Be back before the evening session." She stood, straightened her apron out of pure habit, then felt faintly absurd doing it. "What do I call you?" He looked up from the papers he had already begun reviewing. The pale eyes held something that might, in a different face, have been amusement. "Kael," he said. "In this hall, titles are for formal sessions, not for passing." She nodded, walked to the door, had her hand on the frame when his voice reached her quieter than before, a different quality to it. Less instruction. More something else. "You didn't flinch," he said. "Last night and when Eustace stepped in, I didn't turn around. I know. Most people would have. I know that too." And she walked out before the conversation could become something she didn't yet have the vocabulary to navigate. The residential wing was nothing like the staff quarters she had lived in for 2 years. It wasn't excessive. She wanted to be clear about that, even just to herself. Because excessive would have been easier to hold at arm's length, the room she was given was large by any standard she'd ever applied to rooms. A window that looked south over the water. Walls of warm, dark stone hung with tapestries in deep green and brown that drank the gray morning light and turned it almost amber. A proper bed. Linen that smelled of lavender, a writing desk, a small bookshelf half full of volumes that had clearly been read rather than displayed. She sat on the edge of the bed for a moment after the guard left, and tried to locate herself inside the sequence of events that had produced this particular room, this particular morning, this particular version of her life. 24 hours ago, she had been carrying a carafe of water toward an unremarkable table at the eastern edge of a banquet hall. She unpacked and with the efficiency of someone used to not having much to unpack. Lady Ilsa found her that same afternoon. She was in the small anteroom beside Lady Ilsa's private sitting room, a space stacked with correspondence that needed organizing. She had sorted the letters by territory of origin, then by date received, then cross-referenced against a ledger recording which had received formal replies, and which were still pending. It was meticulous and quiet, and she was deeply grateful for it. She heard Lady Ilsa before she saw her, the precise, unhurried sound of footsteps that exactly where they were going. The older woman appeared in the doorway, regarded the organized stacks with an expression Wren could only describe as satisfaction. You alphabetized by territory and chronologically within each section. I can reorganize if you prefer a different system. I've been asking for someone to sort that correspondence for 3 weeks. Lady Ilsa moved into the room with the ease of someone entirely at home in it. The last 2 assistants filed everything by the color of the envelope seal, which tells me a great deal about how they approach problems. They approached problems in general. She settled into the chair near the window, the good chair, the one positioned to catch the most light, which told Wren she spent real time in this room. Up close, she was more vivid than she'd seemed at a distance. The silver in her hair caught the light. Her eyes were a darker blue than her son's, warmer at the edges. How is your arm? The question surprised her into honesty. Sore. It's fine. It isn't nothing. What you did, Lady Ilsa said. I want you to understand that I know that. Wren looked at the letter in her hands, set it carefully on the correct stack. I reacted. I didn't think about it, no. That's precisely why it means what it means. She didn't know what to do with that, so she said nothing, which seemed to be acceptable. Lady Ilsa watched the water beyond the window for a moment, and Wren returned to the correspondence, and the room was quiet, in a way that felt strangely like it had been quiet together before. Lady Mireille, Lady Ilsa said after a while, has been a problem for longer than last night. Wren kept her eyes on the letters. That isn't my business. No. But it's your context. You should have it. She folded her hands in her lap. The same composed deliberateness her son used when he wanted to be precise. The Western Territory has been positioning itself against the Northern Highland Alliance for 2 seasons. Lady Murray is her cousin's instrument in that effort. What happened last night wasn't a random act of personal temper, Wren said. Before she could stop herself, it was a message. Lady Ilsa looked at her with something warm in her expression. Yes, and you interrupted it. A pause, which is why the grievance exists, because the message didn't land. And someone needed to be made responsible for that. Wren thought about Lady Muriel's face in the moment after. Not just humiliated, recalculating, not just angry at her. Angry the way people are when a plan has been disrupted by something they had not accounted for. She'll try again, almost certainly, in a different form, through different channels. The older woman looked at her steadily, which is part of why you being here is useful. Wren met her eyes. You mean because if something happens to me in this hall, it implicates the Western Territory directly. The silence that followed had a different quality than the ones before it. You're quite sharp, Lady Ilsa said. Not unkindly. I carry plates for a living. I'm not sharp. I just pay attention. In my experience, Lady Ilsa said, rising from the chair with that unhurried grace. Those 2 things are far more connected than most people allow. She moved toward the door, then paused at the threshold and turned back, and the warmth in her face had given way, for just a moment, to something graver. There is, Something I haven't said yet, and I am deciding whether to say it now or later. Ren went still. That mark, Lady Ilsa said quietly. On Lady Morelle's wrist. She did not explain how she knew. She did not need to. Ren's own face, when she had seen it, had said enough for anyone watching her closely. I watched you see it. The room seemed to narrow. I don't know what it means. No. But I do, and for the first time, Ren saw something cross that composed face that she had not seen there before. Not fear exactly, older than fear. The weight of a thing carried a long time in private. Last night was not the beginning of anything. It was a signal. The opening move of something that has been building under this alliance for longer than you have been alive. And by stepping in front of that hand, by seeing what you were never meant to see, a pause. You did not stop it, Ren. You only made yourself part of it. The water ran outside the window. Constant, indifferent. Why are you telling me this? Lady Ilsa looked at her for a long moment, as though weighing the whole shape of a decision. Because you remind me of someone. Someone who worked in this hall a long time ago. Someone who also saw a thing she was never meant to see, and paid for it, and then she was gone. Footsteps precise and unhurried down the corridor, and Ren stood alone in the anteroom, surrounded by organized correspondence, her sore arm, her plain gray dress, and a single sigil, 3 lines crossed by a 4th, burning quietly behind her eyes. The work, at least, made sense. The correspondence had a logic to it, a grammar Ren could learn. Every letter was a small machine with moving parts. Who sent it? What they wanted? What they were pretending to want instead? She sorted them. She cross-referenced them. She built order out of paper. And order was the one thing in that hall she could still hold. In her 2 hands, mornings were correspondence and scheduling. Lady Ilsa's calendar was a complicated thing. The obligations of a woman who held a significant position with no official title and no formal authority, which meant everything she did through relationship and presence rather than rank. And managing it took a kind of attention Ren had never applied to anything before. She learned the names, the histories, the political texture of every request, which invitations Lady Ilsa accepted out of genuine interest, and which she accepted because refusing would cost more than attending. Lady Ilsa taught her most of it directly, without ceremony, sitting in her chair by the window while Ren worked, offering context when it was useful, asking her opinion with a consistency that still, weeks in, caught her slightly off guard every time. Because she had not been in many rooms where her opinion was treated as a resource. She had been in rooms where it was treated as a risk. Afternoons sometimes took her elsewhere in the hall, delivering documents to Tessa's office in the Eastern Wing. Tessa was head of the king's personal guard, a woman of about 30, warm brown skin and dark eyes that assessed you with calm professional interest, strong hands. A posture that said she's spent real time in training. Tessa treated Ren's presence as simply part of the hall's machinery, which Ren found steadying in a way she could not fully explain. The 6 guards under Tessa's command had settled into an easy, professional acknowledgement of her. They called her by name. They moved aside in corridors without the particular flavor of deference that carries condescension folded inside it. Evenings were sometimes dinner at the family table, sometimes a meal in the East Corridor with the permanent staff. A quiet older man named Doran, who managed the supply ledgers. A young woman named Petra, who handled everything that didn't fit anywhere else, and did it with cheerful, relentless competence. And Greta, head of household, mid-40s, short, dark hair, the no-nonsense warmth of a woman who had been in service long enough to have seen everything twice, and stopped being surprised by any of it, and, sometimes, not according to any schedule she could identify. Kael would be in the library. When she passed it on Hurat, she passed at it on her way back from Lady Ilsa's sitting room. The first time she saw the light under the door, she kept walking. The second time, she paused, without entirely deciding to. The third time, he said, without looking up from whatever he was reading, "There's a chair, so she sat in it." They rarely talked at length. He worked, or read, or stood at the window with the particular stillness of a man processing something he wasn't ready to say out loud. She read from the shelf, and the silence between them had changed. From the weighted, careful thing of their first conversations, into something easier, not comfortable, exactly, not yet, but no longer requiring active maintenance. A silence that had decided to exist without explaining itself. She could have settled into it. She nearly did, except for the sigil, because the sigil would not let her go. 3 lines crossed by a fourth. She saw it when she closed her eyes. She saw it in the grain of the wooden desk. She saw it in the lines of the territorial maps that hung in every corridor of that hall. And she could not stop her own mind from doing the thing it had always done. The thing that had made her good at correspondence, and good at carrying plates, and good at staying invisible. She watched. She listened. She remembered. So one afternoon, deep in the oldest stack of correspondence, the letters nobody had touched in years, yellowed at the edges, filed under a territory that no longer used the name it had used when the letters were written. She found it, a single letter, the seal cracked and faded and pressed into the wax, faint but unmistakable. 3 lines crossed by a fourth, the same mark, the exact same mark. As the one inked into the inside of Lady Muriel's wrist, Wren sat very still for a long moment, because letters do not lie about their age. The paper was old. The ink had faded the way ink fades over years, not seasons, which meant the mark was not new, which meant whatever Lady Muriel carried on her wrist had been moving through this hall, through this correspondence, through this alliance. For years, she read the letter, and then she read it 3 more times, because at first it seemed to be nothing. A routine note about grain shipments and border tariffs between 2 minor houses. Dull, administrative. The kind of thing nobody saves and nobody reads twice. Except the numbers did not work. The shipment quantities were too large for the routes described. The payments were too small for the quantities. And one phrase near the bottom sat wrong in her mouth like a stone. A reference to a standing arrangement between the signatory and a member of the Convergence Council. Named only by a sigil in the margin, 3 lines crossed by a fourth. She understood it the way you understand a thing all at once. Not in pieces. In a single cold rush. This was not a letter about grain. This was a payment, a bribe, dressed up in the language of commerce. And it had been moving through the council itself, through the very body that was, right now, reviewing the grievance against her. For years, she put the letter down, carefully, as though it might go off. And she thought, I should not have found this. And then she thought, nobody else ever would have, because nobody else ever looked at the old correspondence. Nobody else cross-referenced the numbers. Nobody else was forgettable enough to be left alone in a room full of secrets with permission to organize them. The very thing that had made her invisible had made her dangerous. She did not tell Kael that night. She wanted to be sure. She wanted to be the kind of sure that nobody could file anything against. So she went back into the old stacks, quietly, methodically, over 3 more afternoons, and she found 2 more. 2 more letters, 2 more cracked seals, 2 more marks in the margins, 2 more arrangements that called themselves commerce and meant something else entirely. 3 letters, 3 threads, all running back to the same place. The council was not neutral. The council had been bought. And the body that would decide whether she was an aggressor or a protector had already decided long ago whose money it answered to. The ruling came on a Thursday, Tessa told her at breakfast, with the directness Wren had come to expect from her, the kind that delivers hard news without decoration. Because Tessa believed correctly that people deserve to know what's coming toward them with enough time to brace. The censure was formal, documented, barred from all sanctioned events for 18 months. Her name entered into the Convergence Council's conduct record, alongside Lady Muriel's account, which described her as an unpredictable and aggressive presence at a diplomatic gathering. A waitress, squatter civiv. The word sat in Wren's chest like swallowed glass. Ellie sent a letter from the staff quarters. Short, smudged the way his writing always was when he wrote fast. I know it isn't fair. I'm sorry. I hope wherever you land is better than where you've been. She folded it and kept it. And underneath the unfairness, underneath the cold, documented insult of it, there was something else, something worse, because she knew what she knew now. She knew the council had been bought, and she knew the ruling against her was not a mistake. It was a decision, a clean purchase decision, by people who needed the Omega, who saw too much to be quietly discredited, filed away, made unbelievable. You cannot accuse a documented aggressor of anything. That was the whole point. That was the plan. She understood it the way she understood the letters, all at once. In a cold rush, the censure was not punishment for blocking a slap. It was preparation for whatever came next. She went back to work because work was the thing she knew how to do when everything else was uncertain. She told no one what she had found. Not yet. She wanted to bring it to Kael whole, complete, undeniable. She wanted to lay 3 letters on his desk and watch him understand it the way she had understood it. She never got the chance to do it on her own terms because that night, the corridor took the choice away from her. She was returning from Lady Ilsa's sitting room, late. The hall lamps turned low. The residential wing quiet in the particular way. Old Stone goes quiet at night when even the river sounds far away. The corridor was long, lined with the territorial maps, and she was halfway down it, thinking about the letters, thinking about how to say it, when she heard the footstep behind her that did not belong to the rhythm of the hall. She knew the rhythm of that hall by now, the guards' patrols, the settling of old beams, the pace of Kael's stride, the lighter step of the man she had met at dinner her first night, the brother, Roan, the precise unhurried footfall of Lady Ilsa. This was none of those. This was a step that did not want to be heard, which is the only reason she heard it. She turned, and the figure was already moving. Fast, dark clothing, no insignia, a hand rising, and this time there was no carafe in her grip and no banquet table to steady against, and no reflex of protection driving her forward. This time the body that had moved without thinking knew only one thing: run. She didn't make it 3 steps. A hand closed on her arm, hard, wrenched her back against the cold stone wall, knocked the breath clean out of her. And in the half-light of the low lamps, as the figure leaned in, as the sleeve of the dark jacket rode up the forearm, she saw it, 3 lines, crossed by a 4th, the same mark, and she understood, in the space of a single breath, exactly what she was. She was not being robbed. She was being silenced. The Omega who saw the mark. The Omega who had been left alone in a room full of old letters. The Omega the council had just spent its purchased authority making unbelievable. So that when she disappeared, when something happened to her, the grievance file would explain it. An unstable woman, an aggressive presence. Who could say what such a person might do to herself? The plan was elegant. The plan was nearly perfect, except for Tessa, because Tessa, it turned out, did not trust the quiet of that wing the way the rest of the hall trusted it. Tessa had set a want residential corridor the moment the ruling came down, quietly, without telling anyone, because Tessa, like Wren, paid attention, and what Tessa had noticed was that a discredited witness is a convenient witness to lose. The corridor erupted. Wren never saw exactly how it happened. There was a shape moving fast out of the dark. There was the sound of a body meeting stone that was not her body. There was a grip releasing her arm. So suddenly, she slid down the wall to the cold floor. And there was Tessa, standing over the dark figure, one knee in his back, one hand pinning his marked wrist to the ground like she was reading it. "Don't move," Tessa said. Not loudly. She never said anything loudly. "Don't even breathe interesting." The figure did not move. Wren sat on the cold floor of the corridor, her back against the wall, her arm aching in the exact place it had ached after the slap, and she started very quietly to laugh. Not because anything was funny. Because the body does strange things when it has decided for the second time in a month that it is not going to be invisible after all. You're going to be all right. I know. You don't sound like you know. I never do. They brought her to the library. Of course they did. Where else would they bring her? Kael was already there, already standing, already moving toward her the moment the door opened with a speed she had not seen from him before, and he stopped a half step short, as though catching himself, as though remembering who he was supposed to be in a room. But she had seen it, the half step before the catching, and she filed it away, the way she filed everything. Tessa told me, he said. His voice was level. It was too level. The kind of level a man holds on to with both hands. Are you hurt? My arm. She held it up slightly. The same arm. It's developing opinions about me. He did not laugh. But something at the corner of his mouth moved, and then went still again. The man, she said, his wrist, I know. Tessa saw it. It's the same mark. Kael. It's the same mark as Lady Morale's. And it's the same mark. And here her voice did something she did not give it permission to do. It tightened. It's the same mark as 3 years on as letters in your mother's old correspondence. Letters about grain that aren't about grain. Bribes that ran through the Convergence Council. For years, the room went very quiet. He crossed to the desk. He set both hands flat on it. He looked down at the maps marked in fresh ink. And for a long moment he said nothing at all. Show me, he said. So she showed him. She laid the 3 letters on the desk in the lamplight. She walked him through the numbers, the quantities that didn't match the routes, the payments that didn't match the quantities, the phrase about a standing arrangement, the mark in the margin. And she watched him understand it the way she had understood it. Not in pieces, in a single cold rush. When he finished reading, he stood very straight, and the stillness that came over him was a different stillness than any she had seen. It was the stillness of a man looking at something he had suspected for a long time and hoped he was wrong about. "No, my father," he said, quietly, not really to her, was betrayed by a man he trusted. At the end, we never proved it. We never knew the shape of it. He paused. We knew there was a shape. He touched the edge of one letter. Just the edge. This is the shape. And then he looked at her. And the look was not calculation. It was not the unreadable thing from the study weeks ago. It was something raw. Something that had been kept behind a wall for a very long time and had just found a crack in it. "You found in a stack of old paper," he said. "What my house has been unable to prove for a decade. I just..." "Don't say it like that." Not harshly. Almost the opposite. As though anyone could have done it. They couldn't. They didn't. For a decade they didn't. She did not know what to do with that, so she said nothing, which, with him, seemed to be acceptable. He filed the appeal the next day, under Household Protection Doctrine, which meant it went above the Convergence Council, to the Highland Elder Assembly, a longer process, a different voting structure. The Western delegation held no seats there, and which also meant, though neither of them said it out loud, that the appeal was no longer only about clearing her name. It was a way of moving the whole question out from under a council they now knew was bought. Roan returned from the Southern Territories. That same week, she had met him at the family table, on her first night. The younger brother, 25, lean where Kael was broad. The same dark coloring but an entirely different energy. Where Kael organized a room through gravity, Roan animated it. Like a fire that had decided to take a more social form, he had been thinner when he came back. More serious, the easy social ease worn down to something quieter, and he came to the anteroom on his second day home, 2 cups of tea in his hands. The way he always seemed to express solidarity through beverage and proximity. He set 1 cup on the edge of the correspondence table without asking whether she wanted it, which she appreciated more than she could have explained. "Kael told me what you found." "The letters. He shouldn't have. It isn't safe to know." "No, it isn't." He wrapped both hands around his cup, "which is why I'm going to tell you something else that isn't safe to know. Because you've earned the right to the whole picture. And because half a picture got my mother's friend killed a long time ago, Ren went still. In the South, I was supposed to be doing diplomacy, reaffirming the Southern alliance. Smiling at the right people, he turned the cup slowly in his hands. What I was actually doing was following money, quietly, the way Kael asked me to. Money moving out of the Western Treasury, toward people it had no honest reason to reach, the council. The council, he nodded. And not only the council, he looked up at her. And for the first time since she'd met him, there was nothing playful in his face at all. There's a member of the Highland Elder Assembly. The body that's about to hear your appeal. The body we moved your case into precisely because we thought it was clean. He paused. It isn't. There's a name on the Western ledgers that I have spent 6 weeks refusing to believe. Because the man it belongs to has sat at my mother's table, has held a position in this house's confidence for 30 years, has wept at my father's grave. The lamp burned low. The dark outside the window was the particular dark of a city that has settled into its night. Who? And he told her. And the name landed in that quiet room like a stone dropped into a deep well. A name she knew, a name everyone in that hall knew. A name spoken with respect in every corridor. A name that would sit in 3 weeks' time, among the elders, deciding whether Ren had committed a crime by refusing to let a woman be struck. The traitor was not at the gates. The traitor was at the table. And he had been there, the whole time. Ren sat with the cold tea going colder in front of her, and the 3 letters locked in a drawer she now checked twice a night. And an aching arm that had, for the second time in a month, refused to let her disappear. And she thought, with no comfort in it at all, I came here to clear my name, and instead I have walked straight into the center of the thing. And the only way out now is through. The name Roan had spoken sat in the room for 3 days before any of them said it out loud again. His name was Lord Halden, eldest seat on the Highland Elder Assembly. 30 years of service, white hair. A walking stick he didn't really need. The kind of face that had been printed on commemorative coins in 2 separate territories. And, somewhere in the Western ledgers Roan had brought home, a payment record going back further than Ren had been alive. He had wept at Kael's father's grave. Ren kept thinking about that. The way you keep coming back to a bruise. She would be sorting correspondence and her hand would still on a letter, and she would think. He stood at the grave, and he cried. And then he went home, and he counted money. How does a person do that? How does a person do that for 30 years and still sleep at night? She did not ask the question out loud, because she suspected the answer was simple and unbearable. Some people are very good at being one shape in the daylight, and another shape entirely once the lamps are low. The library became their war room. Not officially, nobody declared it. It was just where they all ended up. Kael at the desk, Roan in the chair by the window, Tessa standing because Tessa preferred to stand, Lady Ilsa in the good chair, the one positioned to catch the most light, and Ren at the long table near the bookshelves, where she had spread out everything, the 3 letters, the Western ledger pages Roan had brought back, copied in his own hand, the map of the Northern Highlands, and a second map, a blank one, the one she had been building, quietly since the night in the corridor, because the night in the corridor had changed something. It had taken the sigil out of her head and put it onto paper, where she could see it, where she could work with it, where she could fight it. She took the blank map, and she began to mark every meeting referenced in the 3 old letters, every drop point in Roan's ledger pages, every named courier, every house seal, every date, every payment route. She cross-referenced it against the calendar of Lady Ilsa's correspondence, the schedules she had spent 2 months memorizing, who had been where, when, who had written to whom in the days before and after. She built it the way her old self would have built a banquet tray, one steady piece at a time, nothing rushed, nothing assumed, nothing put down until it was sure. And what came up out of the paper was a shape. It was not a vague shape, it was a network, a clean, structured, multi-territory network. of payments and favors and people who had been bought, anchored at 3 points: Lady Mirail, the Western Alpha, and inevitable, centered like a hub at the heart of a wheel. Lord Halden, the map looked when she stepped back from it, less like a piece of evidence, and more like a confession written in someone else's hand. Kael came to stand beside her one evening. He looked at the map a long time, the lamplight low. The fire in the library firebolt was its quiet shapes against the walls. He did not touch the paper. He almost never touched her work directly, as though touching it would imply ownership. You drew this from memory, some of it, most of it. The dates I checked against the ledgers. From memory, she caught herself before the old phrase came out. I have a good eye for it. That isn't a good eye, he said it without softening it. That is a thing very few people in any room I have ever stood in could do. He turned toward her. What did you want to be, he said. Before the banquet circuit, the question came from somewhere she had not expected it to. A cartographer, she said. I grew up in a border territory. The edges of things always seemed more interesting than the centers. It wasn't practical. Most interesting things aren't. A pause. You are one. This is what cartographers do. They look at a territory that everyone else has been walking across blind, and they make it visible. She did not have a steady answer for that, so she didn't try. She just stood beside him, looked at the map with him, and the fire moved, and somewhere down the corridor, a guard's footstep went by on the slow patrol. Tessa had quietly tripled. The Elder Assembly was set for the 15th, 3 weeks out, then 2, then 1. They prepared the way you prepare a roof for a storm, quietly, thoroughly, knowing you cannot stop the storm, only meet it ready. Roan rode out twice more, each time without announcement, each time returning with another piece. A confirmed Kirscher, a second ledger, a signed receipt with a date that lined up with one of Wren's marked dates on the map. Tessa moved her best 2 guards onto Wren's corridor and stopped pretending it was for anything else. Lady Ilsa held her ordinary calendar, exactly as she had always held it. Tea with the same ladies. Dinners with the same houses. As though nothing in the world had changed. Because the moment Lady Ilsa began canceling her engagements, the people watching her would know she knew, and they had not yet decided what to do with the knowledge, so she poured tea. She smiled. She asked after grandchildren. She did all of it with the steady steel of a woman who had buried husband and raised 2 sons in a house where every kindness was also a calculation. And Kael did what Kael did. He worked, he read, he stood at the window of the study. He took his morning walks through Thornwall, the way an alpha king is supposed to take his morning walks. Visible, unhurried, a man with nothing to hide. And every evening, late, he came to the library, and he looked at the map. And one night he said, Wren, if this goes wrong, she looked up from the table. If the assembly does not believe us, if Halden has reached, there we haven't found yet, then we keep going. He shook his head, very slightly. Then they will come for you first. I know. Tessa cannot be in every corridor. I know. I will not let it happen. The 4 words landed with a weight he did not soften. She looked at him. The pale eyes were not cool now. They had not been cool in weeks. They meant else, something she did not yet have a name for. Because she had been too busy building a map to look at it directly. Lee, I know that too, she said. The silence that followed had a quality the other silences had been building toward. For a long time, he did not cross the room. She did not cross it either. But something between them had crossed something, and both of them, in the quiet, knew it. The 15th came up out of the calendar the way deep water comes up out of mountains. Slow. Inevitable, carrying its own weather. The Highland Elder Assembly met in the great chamber on the north side of the King's Hall. A high vaulted room of dark stone, a semicircle of carved seats, 12 elders, robes the color of old wine. The assembly master at the center with the ceremonial gavel that had not been used in anger, the history said, for over 100 years. It would be used today. Wren walked into the chamber that morning the way she had walked into the King's Hall that first noon. Hands clasped, eyes ahead. Plain dress, except this time she carried a folio under her arm, and inside the folio, 3 old letters, copied ledger pages, and 1 map. The chamber was full, every elder seated. The northern Highland houses ranged along the western benches, the southern observers in their muted gray. Lady Ilsa in the front row of the family section, hands folded. Roan beside her. Tessa standing at the back, watchful, and Eli. Somehow in the staff section, he had asked Greta if he could come. Greta had said yes. He sat very straight, honest face, worried eyes, doing the only thing he could do, which was bear witness. And on the eastern benches, the western delegation, Lady Muriel at the center of it. Copper headdress today, as well, as though she wore the color on purpose, as though she wanted the room to remember. Wren remembered. Wren had built a map of remembering, and next to Lady Muriel, robed in the wine color of the elder assembly, Halden, white hair, walking stick across his knees, the face from the commemorative coins, watching the proceedings with the calm of a man who had sat through 100 of them, who knew exactly how they went, or thought he did. The assembly master read the case, the grievance, the original ruling, the appeal filed under household protection doctrine, the witnesses, the evidence. Wren did not really hear the words. She had read them all already. She was watching Halden, his hands rested on the walking stick. Calm, veined, old. They did not move once. Until Lady Murray rose to speak, she spoke beautifully. She had always spoken beautifully. That was part of the trap of her. The voice was warm, the phrasing precise, and what she said, in beautiful, warm, precise phrases, was that the Omega seated across the chamber was not a victim of misunderstanding. She was a long-running project. That was the word she used. Project. She said, the household of the Northern Highland Alpha King had taken in a woman of dubious background, had given her access, had allowed her to handle private correspondence. And the woman, she said, had used that access not in service of her hosts, but in service of her actual employers. Western intelligence, she said, operating, she said, through this woman for months. She paused. She let the chamber feel the shape of it, and then she said, we have evidence that the documents this woman is about to produce were planted by her, forged, or worse, stolen from legitimate Western correspondence, and altered to incriminate this assembly's most senior member. She did not look at Halden when she said it. She did not need to. The chamber tightened. Wren felt it tighten. She felt the eyes of 12 elders shift to her. The northern Highland houses, the southern observers, even Lady Ilsa, very briefly glanced toward the folio under her arm, with something that, in a worse moment, she might have called doubt. She felt her own old self rise up inside her. The one who had 2 years perfecting forgettability. The one who knew with the certainty of a body that has learned its place that this was the part where she folded, apologized, disappeared. And then she thought of Eli's letter. I hope wherever you land is better than where you've been. She thought of Tessa in the dark corridor. Don't even breathe interesting. She thought of her mother who had said, know your place. With love. With love that had been, all along, fear in a kinder coat. She thought of Kael in the library. I will not let it happen. She thought of her own forearm twice now, refusing to be still, and she did not fold. She stood, master of the assembly, she said, and her voice came out steady, which surprised her, which made her briefly want to laugh. I would like to present my evidence. The assembly master nodded. She walked to the central table, plain gray dress, single braid, the wine-stained apron long gone, but somehow she could still feel it, like a phantom limb of who she had been. She opened the folio. She laid down the 3 letters first. She walked the assembly through them, the way Lady Ilsa had taught her to walk through correspondence. Calm, numbered, specific. She read the quantities. She read the roots. She showed the gap. She read the phrase about a standing arrangement. She held up the seal in the margin so the elders could see it. 3 lines crossed by a 4th. Lady Mathil's sleeve, that day in the banquet hall, had risen for a half second only, and Wren had seen. She laid out the copied ledger pages second, Roan's hand, dates, names, routes. The pattern, when set beside the letters, undeniable. The Western Treasury, sending money to people it had no honest reason to reach. And then she laid out the map. She had not shown it to the assembly yet. The folio had hidden it underneath the rest. She laid it flat on the table. She turned it so the elders could see it, and she stepped back. 12 robed figures leaned forward, almost as one, because what they saw was not a piece of evidence. What they saw was the entire decade of suspicion, of half-proof, of unsigned rumor, of betrayals nobody could pin down, laid out in clean black ink, with every payment line drawn, every drop point marked, every named courier traced from origin to destination, every date cross-referenced, every territory boundary respected, every house seal accounted for, and every line, every single line, ran through one central node, marked with a small careful sigil, 3 lines crossed by a fourth ren. Nothing for a long moment. She did not need to. The map said it. This is the network the 3 letters describe, she said at last, quietly. This is the network the Western ledger pages confirm. This is the network that has been moving money through this assembly for 30 years. She paused, and this node, here, the center of every line, she did not point. She did not need to point. Is Lord Halden? The chamber did not erupt. That is not what chambers like that one do. The chamber went very still. Halden's hands had not moved on the walking stick. They moved now, very slightly, just the thumb of his right hand. A small adjustment of the grip. Nothing anybody else in that room would have read. Wren read it. Because Wren read everything, madame, said the assembly master. After a long breath. These are extraordinary claims to make against a sitting elder. They are. If the evidence were anything less, you understand the consequences of an unfounded accusation. I do, you understand, the master continued, and his voice was not unkind. That a map, however carefully drawn, is not by itself proof. I do, she turned. She looked at Roan. Roan nodded once. He rose. He walked to the central table. He laid down beside the map a single folded paper, a receipt. The one he had brought home from his last ride, signed by Halden's own hand, dated within the past 3 months. Acknowledging delivery, in clean, dry administrative language, of an amount of money the receipt called a consulting fee. The amount on the receipt matched, to the coin, one of the entries on the Western ledger. The master of the assembly picked up the receipt. He read it again. He looked at Halden. And the chamber, slowly the way a thing turns, when it has been turning a long time without anybody noticing, turned with him. Halden's white head was bowed slightly. He did not look up. He did not deny. He did not speak. He did not need to. The receipt was in his hand. The map was on the table. The letters were beside the map. And 30 years of carefully maintained respect was draining out of the room as quietly as water out of a cracked cup. It was Lady Morale who broke first. That was the part Wren had not quite expected. She had expected Halden to fight, to bluster, to lean on rank. Lady Morale rose instead. Copper dress, beautiful warm voice, and she turned on him, in front of the chamber. With the speed of an animal that has spent its life knowing exactly when to bite, he told us that the records were clean. He told us the Northern correspondence had been destroyed years ago. He told us, quiet. Halden said it was the first word he had spoken. It was very low, and in that single word Wren heard it. The voice he had, the one that did not belong on the commemorative coins, the one that lived in the room behind the public room. The assembly master raised his hand. Lady Morale, you have just said, but Lord Halden told you, the Northern correspondence was destroyed. That implies a coordinated effort with this elder to suppress evidence. Do you wish to amend that statement? She opened her mouth. She closed it. She looked at Halden. He did not look back. She did not amend it. And the rest of it from there went very quickly. The way the end of a thing always goes very quickly once the shape of the end is visible. The Amos master called for a recess. The recess lasted 40 minutes. When they returned, The verdict was read in the formal old language. The censure against Wren was overturned, her conduct record cleared, Lady Muriel's grievance dismissed on grounds of demonstrated bad faith. Lord Halden suspended from the Elder Assembly pending a full inquiry into the production of false testimony and the receipt of foreign payments. The Western delegation was ordered to remain in Thornwall for the duration of that inquiry. And the chamber, emptied, the way chambers do, slow, quiet, stunned. Wren stood at the central table for a moment, after the elders had gone, her hand resting on the edge of the map. Her own ink, her own work. Ellie came up to her before anyone else did. He didn't say anything. He just stood near her. The way he had stood in the hallway, that morning of the letter, with nothing to offer except presence. She put her hand on his shoulder once. Briefly. He understood it. Lady Ilsa came next. She did not embrace Wren. That was not her way. She looked at her for a long moment instead, the way she had looked at her that first afternoon in the anteroom, with full, unhurried attention. He used to come to dinner. For 30 years I know. You did not know him. No, that helped. A small breath. You saw what we couldn't see, because we could not bear to see it, and then she touched Wren's elbow. Just the elbow, below. The way a mother might. And she moved on. Tessa caught Wren's eye from the back of the chamber. She did not smile. Tessa did not smile much, but she tipped her chin, once. The way she had the morning Wren had woken up still alive, after the corridor. And it was, in its way, the warmest thing anyone in that hall had ever offered her. Roan she found in the corridor outside. He was leaning against the wall with his eyes closed, tired, the way only someone who has carried a name for 6 weeks across 2 territories can be tired. He opened his eyes when she came up. You good? I will be. Yeah. A beat Wren. Yes. My mother said something to me. The night you found the letters. I'm going to tell you what she said, because I think you should know. Okay. He pushed off the wall, she said. The girl reminds me of her mother. Wren went still. There was a woman who worked in this hall 20 years ago, who also saw a thing she was not supposed to see, and who left, quietly, in the middle of one night, because she had a small daughter to keep alive. And because back then, with the people Halden was already protecting, staying would have meant losing the child. Wren did not breathe for a moment. She doesn't know where the woman went. She has tried to find out, on and off, for 20 years. She wanted me to tell you that, so that you knew. There is a thread. If you ever want to pull it, Wren's hand had risen to the front of her dress, to a place she had not pressed her hand against in a long time. The place where Eli's folded letter sat, and underneath it, much older, the small soft fold of paper she had carried since she was a child. The one with 3 words on it, in her mother's handwriting, be small, survive. She had carried those words for 23 years as instruction. She thought, for the first time, that maybe they had also been an apology. Thank you, she said. Roan nodded. He understood it, the way he understood most things. Lightly, without asking for more. Go on. He's in the library, she went. Of course she went. The library was warm, the lamp on the standing desk burning low, the fire working its quiet shapes against the walls, the cedarwood smell and the old paper. The smell, by now, of her own life in this hall. Kael was at the window, back to the door, hands clasped behind him. The dark hair pulled back, the same broad shoulders, the same stillness. She closed the door behind her. He did not turn. Tessa told me, I know. You stood up to 12 elders. Map. I had a map. You had a map. Now he turned, and in the warm light of that library, after months of careful, unreadable expressions, after weeks of half-steps and almost touches and silences that had decided to exist without explaining themselves, his face was not unreadable at all. His face was open. She had not seen it open before. It was something to see.
I owe you an apology.
You don't. I do. He crossed the room. Slower than he had crossed it in the corridor that night, Tessa had brought her in. But all the way this time, he stopped in front of her at a distance that was nearer than they had ever stood. When I asked you to stay, months ago, in this room, I told you it was not a command. I want to say it again now. With everything we know, he paused. You are free, Wren. The censure is gone. Your name is clean. The grievance is dust. You have no debt to this house. You have no obligation to me. You could walk out of this hall tonight and there would be no door anywhere in the Northern Highlands that would not open to you. She looked up at him. I know. You earned that. You earned every part of it. I know. And I am telling you, he said, Queeter, that I would still very much like you to stay. The thoughts that followed had nothing left to defend. She thought for one stupid quick moment about all the small calculations of her old life, the geography of rooms, the angles of approach, the art of not being seen, and she set them down, the way you set down a heavy tray at the end of a long shift, carefully, gratefully. Finally, yes, it was the whole sentence. He did not smile right away. He looked at her for a long moment first, as though making sure of the word, then he reached out, one hand, just once, and the back of his fist brushed a line of her jaw. Briefly, the way you touch something you have been afraid for a long time to touch. It was the first time he had touched her at all. She did not flinch. She had not flinched the night of the slap either. It seemed to be a thing her body had decided about. All right, he said. And the smile, when it came, was not a public smile. She had not seen that smile before either. It was something tense to see. The seasons did not collapse into a single tidy ending. She wanted to be clear about that, even just to herself. The Halden inquiry took most of a year. Witnesses were called. Ledgers were unsealed. Houses that had been polite to him for 30 years went very quiet very quickly. He did not return to the assembly. His seat was filled by his eldest grandson, a man with no part in any of his grandfather's arrangements, whom Wren had quietly asked the assembly master to consider. The grandsons were not their grandfather. That was the thing she insisted on. Of all the things she did that year, it was the one she was quietly proudest of. Lady Mireille was sent home to the Western Territory in disgrace. 3 of the Western houses dissolved their alliance with her cousin's seat within the year. The 4th followed the year after. The Confucius Council reformed its conduct statutes, added clear language defining protective intervention. Tessa told her this with the quiet professional satisfaction that was, on Tessa, the equivalent of joy. Mara wrote her a letter. From the staff quarters, a short one. Awkward. She did not apologize exactly. People like Mara rarely do. But she said that she had been wrong to close the door, and that she hoped Wren was well, and that there would always be a job on her circuit if Wren ever wanted one. Wren wrote her back, thanked her, said no. Ely was hired onto the King's Hall permanent staff that spring. Wren had mentioned his name to Greta in passing, the steadiness of him, the honest face. The way he had stood in a hallway with nothing useful to offer and offered his presence anyway, which she had come to understand was not a small thing. He arrived nervous and careful. Within 3 months he had become indispensable, in the way that genuinely good people tend to be, quietly. Without anyone needing to announce it, Roan rode out twice more before the inquiry closed. Came back thinner. Came back himself again, slowly, over honey cake and family dinners and the patient quiet of his mother's company. Wren updated the Eastern boundary surveys. All of them. It took 4 months, 3 field rides with Tessa as escort. The completed surveys were submitted to the Highland Cartographic Archive in the spring. Her name was on the title page. She held the bound copy for a long moment when it came. Kael found her in the library that evening, with it still in her hands. He looked at the cover, at her name on it, at her hands holding it, at whatever was on her face that she was not managing as carefully as usual. He didn't say anything. He sat in the chair next to hers. He reached over and turned to the first map. The northeastern boundary, the one she had spent the most time on, the one where the old survey had been most wrong, and he looked at it with the focused, genuine attention of a man who understood exactly what he was looking at. They sat like that a long time. In the cedarwood quiet, Lady Ilsa pulled the thread. She did it gently. Over months. Letters sent through old contacts. discreet inquiries in a half-dozen border territories, and one cold morning in early winter, she came into the anteroom with an envelope in her hand, and she set it on the correspondence table. "I have an address, if you want it." Renan held the envelope a long time before she opened it. She did not open it that day. She opened it 3 days later in the library, with Kael in the room, working at his desk, pretending not to watch her. She wrote the letter herself. She did not know what to say, so she said true things. She said she was 23. She said she was alive. She said she had stayed small for a long time, and then she had stopped. She said she did not need anything. She said she only wanted her mother to know. She did not include a return address. She let the older woman choose. The reply came in the spring. A small, careful letter. Her mother's handwriting, older now. The same handwriting as the soft folded note she had carried since childhood. And the letter said only 6 words. "I am so proud of you." Ren read them in the library, sitting by the fire. The bound surveys on the table beside her. She did not cry. She just sat there, holding the letter, feeling something inside her chest that had been pressed flat for 23 years, lift just a little. Like a wing testing the air. On the last morning of that first year, she stood at the window of the room that had long since stopped, feeling borrowed, and looked out at the water below. Silver in the early light. Constant. Comforting precisely because of that constancy. She thought about the woman she had been a year ago, pressing herself flat against walls, cultivating invisibility, carrying plates through rooms full of people who were never meant to see her. She had not been wrong to survive the way she had survived. She wanted to be clear about that, even just to herself. The smallness had been a strategy, not a flaw. The invisibility had been a tool, not a destiny, but tools are for using, and strategies are for the conditions that require them. And the conditions had changed. She had changed them. With a reflex, with a forearm, with 8 words on a sealed letter, and a choice to walk toward them instead of away, with 3 old letters in a forgotten stack, with a map drawn out of pure stubborn paying attention, with a single sentence spoken to 12 elders in a chamber of dark stone. Yes, Kael appeared in the doorway behind her. She heard him before she saw him. The particular quality of his step that she now knew as well as her own. He looked at her at the window and said nothing. She turned and looked at him. And the morning light came through the glass and fell across the both of them. Warm, unhurried, like something that had decided to stay. That was enough. That was everything. That was how it ended. Not with a door closing, but with a morning beginning, and the certain quiet knowledge that this one was theirs. The first weeks in the King's Hall did not feel like a job. They felt like learning a new language. Every corridor had a grammar. Every door had a tone. Every footstep belonged to somebody. And until Ren learned which footstep belonged to which person, every sound in that hall was a small unanswered question. She made a list. She did not write it down. She kept it inside her head. The way she had once kept the table maps of the Crescent Hall. Which guest sat where? Which guest had asked for a second pour? Which guest was watching the door for somebody who is not coming? She made her list of the King's Hall the same way. Kael's stride was even, heavy on the heel, slow, 3 beats and a pause. 3 beats and a pause. The pause was where he was thinking. Roan's was lighter, faster, off-beat the way a dancer is off-beat on purpose. He hummed when he walked alone. She did not think he knew he did it. Lady Ilsa walked the way she did everything else, precisely, without hurry. The same number of steps between the doorway and the chair by the window every single time. Ren counted once. Then again 2 days later, both counts matched. Tessissa walked silently when she wanted to. And when she did not want to, she walked with deliberate sound, so that the hall would know she was passing. Ren learned the difference within a week. The silent walking was for the night patrols. The sound walking was for the daylight. Tessa was telling the building which version of herself it was getting in any given moment. Greta walked like a woman who has walked 20 years in the same hallways, and could not be bothered to lift her feet for a single one of them. The shuffle of her soft shoes on stone was, after a while, the warmest sound in that wing. It meant tea was coming. It meant something hot from the kitchen. It meant a folded napkin set down beside Wren's elbow without a single word. Doran did not walk much. He sat. The supply ledgers came to him. He came to the supply ledgers. The path between his office and the storerooms was 18 steps. Wren measured it once. He measured it every day of his life. Petra moved in bursts. Across the kitchen courtyard. Up 2 flights of stairs. Down a corridor at a near run, and then stopped, vanished. Off to fix some new small thing that had not been broken yet, but was in her professional opinion about to be. Wren learned them all, and she did not at first understand why she was learning them, until she did. Until one morning, Lady Ilsa said, without looking up from her own correspondence, "Have Petra check the Western flu. It will smoke again this week if she doesn't." And Wren had thought, how does she know that? And then she had thought. The same way I now know which floor of this hall Kael is on without looking. We are paying attention. We are all paying attention, in our different ways, to different things. Because the women in this hall, the staff, the people without titles, the ones whose names did not sit on commemorative coins, were the ones who had been holding the building together, quietly, for longer than the Alpha King had been alive. And nobody had ever once said thank you. Wren did not say thank you either. That was not the language of the hall. The language of the hall was a hot cup of tea set down by an elbow, a flue checked before it smoked, a corridor watched on a night nobody else thought to watch. The language of the hall was attention, and for the first time in 23 years, Wren was not the only one speaking it. The more Lady Ilsa changed her, she did not realize they were changing her. That was the thing about real change. You did not see it on the day. You saw it weeks later when you reached for something inside yourself, and a different hand reached back. Lady Ilsa did I not teach the way teachers taught. Lady Ilsa taught the way water taught a stone, slow, patient, without lecture. Just the repeated presence of the thing itself, until you could not help but be shaped by it. In the second week, she handed Wren a letter that had come from a southern matriarch and said, "What do you make of this one?" Wren read it, a short note, politely worded, inviting Lady Ilsa to a wedding in 2 months. 2 short lines about the weather in the south. A closing line about the matriarch's granddaughter. It's a wedding invitation. Wren said, what else? Wren read it. The matriarch had mentioned the granddaughter. The granddaughter was unmarried. The wedding was in the same province where the matriarch's grandson had recently inherited a holding. The granddaughter would be at the wedding. The matriarch were very fond of the granddaughter. She wants you to meet the granddaughter, Wren said. Without saying it. Why? Wren thought about it. Because a match made at her own grandson's wedding would not look like a match she had made. It would look like one the young people had stumbled into themselves, which she could then approve, which would make her gracious. Instead of grasping, Lady Ilsa nodded once. Now, what do I write back? That was the lesson. That was always the lesson. Not what was said in the letter, what was wanted by the letter. Wren learned to read for the want underneath. By the end of the first month, she could pick up an envelope and feel the weight of what it was actually asking before she opened it. The way an old farmer can feel the weather coming in the joints of his hands. In the 3rd week, Lady Ilsa caught her doing it. Caught the small unconscious thing Wren did with her thumb against the corner of every letter before she opened it. A pause. A weighing. Lady Ilsa watched her do it across 3 letters in a row. And then she set down her own correspondence and said, "My mother used to do that." Wren looked up, with her thumb. The exact same. I had forgotten. Lady Ilsa's eyes had gone somewhere far for a moment. She used to say a letter told you everything was going to tell you before you ever broke the seal. If you knew how to listen to paper. My mother said something like that too. Wren had not meant to say it. The words came out before she had given them permission. Lady Ilsa did not press. She just looked across the room for a long moment. And then she said, very gently, "Then it is in your hands, honestly. You did not learn that from me." And she went back to her letters. And Wren went back to hers. But the room had changed. Something old had been named between them. Something neither of them had asked for. The shape of a woman neither of them had spoken about. A woman who had folded letters in a small kitchen somewhere. A woman who had taught a daughter to weigh paper. A woman who had also once worked in this hall. The work continued. The lamp burned. The river ran outside, and Wren thought, maybe my mother is not gone the way I thought she was gone. Maybe she is in the way I touch a letter. Maybe she has been in my hands the whole time. She had her first real conversation with Kael in the library on a Wednesday. She remembered it was a Wednesday because it was the day Greta made bread. Greta made bread on Wednesdays. The whole residential wing smelled of it from about 4 in the afternoon. Yeast and warm flour, and the particular brown smell of a crust that had spent the right amount of time in a hot oven. The library smelled of it too, that evening. The smell had slipped in under the door and refused to leave. Wren was in her usual chair, a book of border surveys on her lap. The maps so old the territorial names had been crossed out and rewritten twice. Kael was at the standing desk, reading a long report on grain prices. He had not spoken in over an hour, which was not unusual. What was unusual was that he set the report down, walked to the window, stood there for a long moment, hands clasped behind his back, and then said, without turning, "What was your father like?" The question was so quiet, she almost missed it. She closed the book on her lap, carefully, the way Lady Ilsa had taught her to close letters. "I don't know," she said. "He died before I could remember him." A pause. "What did your mother tell you about him?" Wren thought about that. Not much. She said he had been kind. She said he had been good with his hands. She said he had laughed easily. And then she said it was better not to talk about him too much, because remembering people you cannot reach is a hard thing to do every day. "Yes," Kael said, still at the window. "It is." She understood then why he had asked. She did not say so. Some understandings did not need to be named to be shared. She let the silence settle. The bread smell drifted under the door. Somewhere down the corridor, Greta's soft shoes shuffled past. After a long while, Kael said, "My father liked maps." Wren waited. He had no patience for them. He could not draw a straight line to save his life, but he liked them. He used to spread the territorial charts on the floor of this room and lie on his stomach beside them, with a cup of tea, for hours. Reading the names of villages he would never visit, she tried to picture it. She found, to her surprise, that she could, he used to say. A map is a promise, from the people who made it to the people who use it, that somebody walked this ground and remembered it. So that you would not have to walk it blind. He turned then, just slightly, so that she could see his face in profile. "He would have liked you, Wren." She did not have a steady answer for that, so she did not try to give one, but she did set down the book, and she did stand up, and she walked over to the standing desk, and she picked up the report on grain prices he had set aside, and she said, without looking at him, "There's an error on page 3. The southern shipments don't match the western tariff records." He looked at her. "Show me." She showed him, and they worked for another 2 hours, side by side, not saying anything that needed to be said out loud. The bread smell, the lamp burning, the slow, steady pulse of a building that had decided somewhere in itself to keep them both eyed it. It was not the conversation she had expected to have. It was the one she would remember. She had not expected to make a friend. Friendships had never been a steady part of her life. The banquet circuit moved her through too many rooms too quickly. The staff quarters had been a place to sleep, not a place to live. She had known faces. She had not known people. Petra changed that. Petra was 28, sharp-eyed, quick-handed. She wore her hair in a thick braid down her back because she had decided at 14 that hair worn any other way was a hostage to fortune. She had been at the King's Hall since she was 16. She knew every secret passage, every loose floor stone, every door that stuck in the damp. Petra found Wren one evening in the eastern corridor. Wren was carrying a basket of folded linen back from the laundry because Greta's hip had been bad all day, and nobody else had thought to do it. Petra fell into step beside her. "You're doing the linen run. Greta's hip." "I know." "I told her to sit." "She didn't sit. She wouldn't." "No." They walked. Petra said, "I was going to come find you anyway." "Why?" "Because I have a theory about you, and I want to test it." Wren looked at her sidelong. Petra had a small private smile on her face, the smile of a woman who had been thinking about something all afternoon and was now ready to make use of it. "What's your theory?" "My theory," Petra said, "is that you are the second smartest person in this building, and the first smartest person doesn't know it yet." Wren almost dropped the basket. "Petra, I'm not teasing you. I'm being practical." Petra adjusted the basket in Wren's arms without asking. "I have been watching you for 6 weeks. You see things in this house nobody else sees. Greta sees them. I see them. Tessa probably sees them. The men don't. The men think the building runs itself, which is sweet of them. And also not true." Wren did not know what to say, so she said, "Who is the first smartest, Lady Ilsa?" "Obviously." "Oh, don't sound disappointed. You are 23. She is 60. Give yourself time." Petra grinned then. The first wide, easy grin Wren had seen on her. "I just wanted you to know," Petra said, "that some of us see you, that's all. The men in this building will get there. They are slow, they are good men, but they are slow. The women here saw you, the first week. We have been waiting for you to notice that we saw you." She bumped her shoulder against Wren's, lightly, like a sister. "All right," Petra said. End of speech. "Let's get this linen put away before Greta tries to do it herself out of spite." They walked the rest of the way in companionable quiet, and something inside Wren that had been alone for a very long time sat down and rested, for the first time in years. There came a morning in late spring when Wren went down to the cartographic archive alone. She had not been alone in the archive before. Tessa had always come with her on the field rides. Roan had come with her once to the archive itself to deliver the bound surveys. The archivists knew her face by then. They nodded to her in the corridors. They did not, in the older Highland way, address her by her title, because she did not have one. She did not mind. A title was just a coin somebody had decided to mint. Her name on the title page of the Eastern Boundary Survey was the only mint mark she needed. She walked down through the city in the early light. The market stalls were opening. The baker's shutters were going up. The river was loud that morning, full from a week of rain in the mountains. She walked with her hands clasped in front of her, out of habit, and then, halfway down the slope of the city, she made herself unclasp them. She let her hands swing. She felt foolish for about 10 paces. And then she did not feel foolish anymore. The archive was a low, long building near the river, older than the King's Hall. The kind of building that had been built once, and then simply maintained for centuries, because nobody had ever found a reason to change it. Wren liked it for that. She liked buildings that knew what they were. She went down into the lower vault. She had a permit. Roan had arranged it. There was a stack of older surveys down there that she wanted to look at. Surveys from 100 years before the current borders. She wanted to see how the cartographers of an earlier century had drawn the line between the Northern Highlands and the Highlands territory that was now called Western. She wanted to see whether the line had always run where it now ran, or whether it had moved. She suspected it had moved. She suspected the line had been a different line once, and that a small, quiet bend in it now corresponded to something useful for somebody. She was right. She found the older surveys in the third row of the third shelf in the third room. She brought them up to a reading table near the high window. She unrolled them. She weighted the corners with the small lid weights the archivists kept in a wooden bowl for that purpose. She looked at the older line. She looked at the newer line. She traced the difference with her finger. The bend was small. Half a day's ride on horseback. Maybe less. The kind of difference nobody would notice unless they were specifically looking. The kind of a difference that had been agreed to a long time ago, by people who had wanted specifically for nobody to notice. She looked at the date. The line had moved 68 years ago. She did the math, 68 years ago. Halden would have been a young man, just beginning his career, just starting to be known, just beginning to learn, perhaps, how a line on a map could be moved if the right people were paid in the right way to look elsewhere when it happened. She sat with that for a long moment. She thought about a young man, perhaps her age, in a different century making his first quiet arrangement. A small bend, a small bribe, a small step, and then 30 years, and then 60, and then a white-haired man weeping at a friend's grave with the muscle memory of grief, but no longer, perhaps, the actual feeling of it. How does a person become that? How does a person take the first small step? She did not know. She suspected nobody knew. She suspected even the man himself did not know. She suspected the first small step had not felt like the first of anything. It had felt like a Tuesday, with a small thing to do on it, and then a Wednesday, with another small thing, and then a year, and then a life. She thought about her own first small step. She thought about the carafe in her left hand, the copper sleeve, the half-second, a small step, too, in the other direction. She rolled the maps back up, carefully, the way the archivists had taught her. She returned the weights to the wooden bowl. She wrote a brief note in the request log for the senior archivist. The current western boundary appears to deviate from the original survey along the lower river course. Recommend a fresh field survey to verify. She signed it. She did not say anything else. The senior archivist would know what to do. She walked back up through the city. The day was fully awake by then. The market full, the baker's shutters open, and the bread already gone from the front shelves. She did not clasp her hands. She let them swing the whole way up the hill. When she got back to the King's Hall, Kael was in the courtyard with Tessa. They were going over something in a stack of papers. He looked up when she came through the gate. She did not stop. She did not need to. He watched her cross the courtyard, the way he always did, the way she had decided, somewhere along the line, that she liked him, too. She nodded once. He nodded once back. And she went on upstairs to the anteroom, to get back to the work, because the work was the thing she knew how to do, and the work now was not survival. The work now was simply a life she had not known she was allowed to want, a life that, day by day, in the quiet language of attention, of letters opened with a thumb, of footsteps named in the dark, of small steady acts of seeing and being seen, had decided to be hers.